What did it take to create the Wine Bible, which is a 700-page masterwork on wine? What do wines taste like when they're in the clouds, literally 10,000 feet above sea level? And which new and emerging wine regions should be on your radar? Well, those are the tips and stories that we are going to ask of our guest this evening. But if you're watching this video on the replay, please, in the comments, type the word replay. Let me know that you're here. Optional, let me know where you're logging in from, what the weather's like, what's in your glass, whatever you like. And of course, if you're here with me live, please do the same. I'm Natalie McLean, and I host popular online wine and food courses, and you've just joined one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers who gather every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine, like our guest. Now, this video is based on a recording I made for the Unreserved Wine podcast, but I will be live in the comments. So please get in there. Let me know what tips and stories are you enjoying? What questions do you have that might be unanswered? And I will be responding live and in real time. Now, just before I introduce our guest, I want to say that 3 of you in the continental U.S. are going to win a signed copy of her new book, The Wine Bible. And the reason for restricting it to the U.S. is shipping regulations. So, but for this one, we are offering 3 signed copies of The Wine Bible, which is just beautiful. We are going to dive into that in a minute, but look at this. It's gorgeous, and we're going to talk all about that with our guest. So, back to our guest. Time magazine called Karen MacNeil America's Missionary of the Vine. The former wine correspondent for the Today Show on NBC, Karen was also the host of the PBS series, Food, Wine, and Friends with Karen MacNeil. And she won an Emmy for that show. She is the creator and chairman emeritus of the Rudd Center for Professional Wine Studies at the Culinary Institute of America, which has been called the Harvard of Wine Education. Karen has just published the 3rd edition of the Wine Bible, as I mentioned, and it is the single best-selling wine book in the United States, probably North America, I would venture, with more than 1 million copies sold. She joins us now from her home, or office perhaps, in Napa Valley. Karen, welcome. I'm so glad you're here with us.
Hi, Natalie. It's just a pleasure to be with you. And I'm actually probably a little closer to you than I normally would be. I'm in a little cabin up in the Hudson River Valley of New York State.
Oh, wow.
So it's rainy here, but it's beautiful.
Excellent. So you're already squiring yourself away to work on the 5th edition, I guess. Just kidding.
Yeah, you better be just kidding.
Yeah, I know. I can imagine. What a feat. Okay, so before we dive in to the Wine Bible and your wine career, I would love to hear about your remarkable childhood, Karen. There were no books in your family home, as I understand it, and no one was even expected to finish high school. So what motivated you to excel academically?
I don't know. You know, I did grow up very poor and in a not very wonderful household, to say the least. As you point out, there were no books, there was no music. It was really a very difficult and almost very oppressive childhood. So much so that I ran away from home at the age of 14 and a half. Wow. Why anyone has will, determination, I'm not sure. I do know that one of the things that helped me remarkably was that I was very good in school. I was a really diligent kid. School for me, most kids often don't like going to school. I loved going to school. Every minute I could be out of my own house and in an environment of learning was wonderful for me. So I would say that school saved me in a sense.
Wow. It would probably was an oasis. If home life wasn't so great, school was safe and you were affirmed for your assiduity as being a student. Okay, so you were diagnosed with polio when you were just 6 years old and bedridden because of it. As you mentioned, you left home, ran away at 14. How did you manage to convince a judge to let you live on your own at just 14 years old?
Yeah, you can't legally live alone at that age, and I was terrified of being put in a foster home, which I nearly was. But because I was a good student, I was able to convince the judge. When I look back on this now, I think, oh my goodness, I was able to convince the judge to allow me to live on my own, and his stipulations were as long as I could maintain a straight A average and support myself.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, I can do that. And so starting, by this time I had turned about 15 by the time I was in front of the judge. And, he assigned me a parole officer who would check in with me every few months. And I worked in high school, before school, after school, and 2 jobs on the weekends. And because I was terrified of that foster home, boy, I still maintained my A average. And the way this maybe connects to wine is so at age 15, it would be at night, but I would have a glass of wine as I was doing my homework. And I didn't have any adults around to tell me not to. And, to me, it seemed like the most civilized thing in the world to have a glass of wine. And I think I got this, I had a very, I had been almost shut in. So I don't know how I got this idea. I think it was really from reading novels that elegant people drank a glass of wine. Of course, right. I was drinking an 89-cent Bulgarian red, but okay.
You got to start somewhere.
You got to start somewhere.
Oh, that's fabulous. What a remarkable story. I mean, this is like movie material, Karen, because we all know where you are now. That rise is incredible. So then at 19, you moved to New York City. What drew you to the Big Apple, especially you're still very young?
We all are probably thankful for youth and naivete, because if you really knew what you were in for, right, you would never make certain decisions. But with a 19-year-old brain, I decided that, yes, I should go to New York and I should try to be a writer. I had never taken a writing class. I didn't graduate with a degree in journalism. But somehow I felt like writing was one of those things, lucky for me, that if you can do it, nobody asks you for your degree in journalism or what writing classes you took.
It's true.
Yeah, still, it was really hard to break in to the New York publishing world. And I lived in a 5th floor walk-up in a part of New York known as Hell's Kitchen, for good reason.
Is that near Chelsea? Or
yeah, it's
that?
near.
Okay.
Today it's pretty nice. It is Chelsea, but in the 1970s, it was a kind of a scary place. Huh. And I collected 324 rejection slips, which I thumbtacked to the wall of my apartment. And I was writing about everything, trying to get published, right? So I was working all day, working at night. I apprenticed myself to a literary agent for free. And then at late night, I was writing articles about women's issues and poetry and politics and all kinds of things. And nothing sold. And I looked at all those rejection slips every day. One day I had this brilliant idea, I thought, that I should try writing about food, because I loved food, and also because I was on food stamps, and my diet was terrible. Food stamps don't buy you a lot. And my theory was that if you started writing about food, maybe people would give you samples. So I saw this as a way of improving my diet. And in fact, people did give you samples. And one day, in those days in New York, there were a lot of Jewish delis. And in these Jewish delis, there would be enormous blocks, like 2 feet by 2 feet, white blocks. And the first time I saw one of these, I asked this deli man, what is that? And he said, like, lady, what part of America are you from? You know, that's butter. And I thought, wow. And these were fabulous farmstead butters. So I did a taste test from all these Jewish delis, and I wrote a piece on butter that was published in the Village Voice. It was my first piece. I got paid $30. I was ecstatic.
That was a prestigious publication too.
Yeah, no, and as you would know, and anyone watching who's a writer would know that, you know, all you need is that one first break in journalism, and then you can say to the next magazine, you know, my piece was just published in the Village Voice, and so it goes. So yes, butter.
Butter.
I bought a bottle of champagne with my $30 and drank the whole thing.
Oh, that's excellent. Which champagne?
Pomeray. I do remember that exactly.
Wow. That is such a great start, great story. So then you had, I don't know if this is chronological, but you had a stint at True Romance, True Secrets magazine. How did that help you as a writer?
Well, at this point, I was, you know, able to get a few freelance pieces published every month, but that's, you know, the money, $30 notwithstanding, is certainly not enough to pay a New York City rent. And so I was still working every day as a telephone receptionist, as a maid, as a bus person in restaurants, and I decided I really had to get closer somehow to writing, to publishing. And so I answered this ad one day in the newspaper for an assistant editor. Now, I had never been an editor. I had no idea. And so I went to this publishing house called McFadden Women's Group and met with an editor, and she said, okay, I'm going to give you a piece and I want you to edit it, make sure, you know, get every mistake that is in this piece. And so I said to her, I'm sure I could do that. I don't know standard editing symbols though, but I can mark everything that I think is wrong. And she said, that's okay, we'll teach you standard editing symbols later, but here you go. So I sat in this room. Anyway, I actually did edit the piece really well. And she said, okay, here, you know, now memorize these symbols. And then she said, we like your work, you're hired. And then I discovered that I had just joined a group of women's magazines that specialized in, one was called True Romance, True Secrets, True Love, True Experiences. There were 7 trues. And they were, in their day, unbelievable magazines. They had huge circulations. True Story had a circulation of 5 million women, which was big in the 70s. And the only last upshot of this was, I remember I got paid $125 a week, and I knew I wouldn't make a whole lot of money because publishing is like writing. You want to make money, you go into finance or something. But sure. I was desperate to be good at writing the headlines of these articles, because if you were a good headline writer, you got paid $25 more a week. I was desperate to be good at headlines, and I was awful. So I never got the extra $25 a week.
Well, I guess that would be sort of almost like clickbaity, but I guess that wasn't your forte. Yes. You're more, I think you're more in depth than that, Karen. So it worked out in the end for you. So you started to learn about wine while you were still in New York in a really unusual way. How did that come about? Yes,
at some point, a few years go by, and I was now regularly published in food. It was the great heyday in the U.S. of magazines Gentleman's Quarterly, Elle, Mirabella. It were just, New York was full of, New York Magazine, full of fabulous magazines. And so after a couple of years, I was writing about food for the New York Times, for all of the top magazines. And what I secretly realized, though, is I didn't want to become, I didn't want to try to become an expert in Italian food or French food. What I really loved and was fascinated by was the whole world of gastronomy, including beverages. Well, you could, the four great beverages of history are tea, coffee, beer, and wine. Mm-hmm. And I could teach myself about tea and coffee and beer. But wine was hard to teach yourself. The books that then existed were written by British authors. They were very dry. They assumed a familiarity with European geography that I didn't have. And they were kind of classist, All of those writers let you know that they had gone to Oxford or Cambridge, and it just wasn't, I couldn't understand those books. And yet there was also no way into the wine industry because there were no wine classes even in New York in those days. Retailers didn't do tastings, couldn't do tastings legally in New York. So there was no way in unless if you were a young person, unless you had a lot of money or parents or someone who turned you on to great wine, and I didn't have either of those things. So back then, most of the wine writing in the whole country, in all of the United States, was controlled by 5 or 6 men, and they wrote for everybody. Even the women's magazines like Vogue, where you would think, Vogue would have a woman wine writer, but no, a man wrote the Vogue column. Wow. And producers from all over the world would fly into New York to do tastings for these men. Chianti Classico producers on Monday and the pork producers on Wednesday. It was astounding. So a friend of mine was one of these men, and he knew how much I wanted to learn about wine. And so he asked the others if I could taste with them, if I could be a part of this group, be invited to these tastings.
And was this Alex Bespalov?
Yeah,
okay.
The late Alex Bespalov.
Great writer.
Very wonderful writer and a wonderful man. And he convinced the others. And so the deal was, yes, I could come and taste with them on the condition I didn't talk.
Oh my God!
I know, it's unthinkable now.
Today, it's like, put a mustache on.
And I didn't talk for many years. Natalie, I didn't want to talk as in give my opinion. As far as I was concerned, I didn't have an opinion about wine. I didn't know enough to have a good, valid opinion about wine. But what I did want to do was ask these men questions.
Sure.
I was full of questions. I wanted to know why red wine was red. Every basic question in the universe. Huh. And the way this connects back, though, is that I remembered many years later when I began to write the first wine Bible. I remembered so clearly all the issues that were confusing, all the questions I had, everything that didn't make sense to me. And the wine Bible was in some ways formed around those questions, which I knew if I had them, lots of people had them.
Sure.
So anyway, yes. And, I shouldn't say this, but the wine Bible has outsold all of the books that all of those men have written.
Yay! No, kudos to you. It's outsold because of the unparalleled scholarship and creativity that you invest in that book. We are going to get to that, but that just
you know
is
what
well
I
deserved.
did. Thank you. You know what I did really learn from these men, though, and I am so grateful for this. I learned sort of how to comport myself, how to think about wine. They were really good thinkers. Okay. They concentrated on wine enormously. They really loved wine. They were very serious. There was no chatting. It was not fun. It was they were really truly professional in their demeanor. And I adopted that way of being because I wanted to be like them. And I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, it sounds like they were very rigorous in their tasting, like these different regions and people were
Very.
coming in to present. So that's great. What a great foundational story for the way the Wine Bible is kind of organized. So when and why did you decide to move from New York to Napa?
Yes, one day two things happened. I was in the Rainbow Room, which had just been redone, the famous Rainbow Room in New York.
At the top of the Rockefeller Center?
Yes, at
Yes,
top of
okay.
Rockefeller Center.
Had a glorious
And
view, yeah.
yes, glorious views. It was all very fancy. And there I was at a black tie event. I had my small little purse with my little notebook inside the little purse. And I remember they were pouring this fantastic white Burgundy, a Lafleur, and I took out my notebook and was writing a note, and all of a sudden the unreality of that hit me. I thought, what am I doing all dressed up in the Rainbow Room, passing judgment on this wine when I've never been in this vineyard. I don't know these people. I don't know all the work that they went to. I should not be passing judgment on this wine. I'm too far removed. I'm in a nightclub in New York. And at the same time in New York, I realized that for all of its wonderfulness as a place to be when you're young, as I was getting older, I was thinking, I don't know that I think New York is the place to get older. I was still very young at this point, so I'm not sure why I was worried about that. But I became convinced that in order to be a better wine writer, I needed to be closer to grapevines, even not making the wine myself, that somehow being in and around vineyards would, through osmosis or something, make me a better wine writer. And I think it has.
Indeed, indeed. And so I guess Napa at that time would have been the clear choice back in the 70s or 80s,
Yes.
in terms of
Yes.
its development, as opposed to Oregon or New York State or Washington.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could have gone anywhere, I suppose, but I knew a few people in Napa. I had visited on research trips, and I thought, I could live in Napa.
We all could. We'll live vicariously through you, Karen. So now let's talk about the Wine Bible. Tell us the story of how it came to be, how it got its name, because that's interesting too.
Yes. So, one day I was sitting in my office, which was my apartment, of course, New York, right? Very expensive. No one has a separate office. And the phone rang, and the person said, hello, this is Peter Workman. Would you like to have lunch? And I was speechless. I mean, I knew who Peter Workman was, but I had never met him. He was a legend. He died about a decade ago, but he was a legend in New York publishing as being one of the most creative and astounding true publishers of great traditional New York publishers. And so I said, okay. And he said, great. So meet me here. He names a lunch spot in Soho. So off I go. And he says, I really liked the article you wrote yesterday in the New York Times Magazine section. It was an article on food, an article on lobster rolls and New England sandwiches, of all things, right? So he said, I love the way you write. So what book have you always wanted to do? And I thought, this cannot be happening to me, right? Because this is like sitting at the old idea of sitting at the drugstore counter and being discovered by Steven Spielberg or something.
Right, exactly.
And I thought, oh my goodness. So I said, I don't want to write a book. and he said, that is the wrong answer. Peter Workman, and what book have you always wanted to write? And of course, he was thinking that I would say, because he had read a food piece, that I would say, oh, I want to write a book on risotto or something, right? And
Sure.
I said, okay, you're right. That's the wrong answer. I do want to write a book about wine. And he said, wine? Well, we've never published a book on wine. They were very famous for the Silver Palette cookbooks and so many other types of books, but especially the Workman cookbooks were great. So anyway, he said, okay, wine. All right, wine it is. Can you have it ready in a year? And I said, absolutely. I knew now I was supposed to say yes. So anyway, the year is up, and I called him up. I said, Peter, I'm sorry, but it's not done. So he said, okay, well, take another year. Anyway, this went on for 8 years. And every year we would go out to dinner. He loved wine, so we would go out to some fancy restaurant. He would take me out. We would order a great bottle of wine, and he would say, now promise me you're not just sitting around in your pajamas or something. And I would be like, no, Peter, I promise you, I'm really working on it, but it's bigger than what we originally thought. So at the end of about now 9 years, the Wine Bible's done. It's this big manuscript. And with great trepidation, I go down to his office and bring it to him. And I'm terrified at this point, because what if, the small advance money I had gotten had run out long ago. I had essentially made 6 cents an hour for 9 years writing this. And I thought, what if he doesn't like it? What will I do? I'll throw myself off the roof of the building.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm sitting there terrified, quiet, and he's flipping through it. And his face is revealing nothing. And I'm thinking, oh God, I'm sunk. This is awful. Anyway, he looks up and he says, it's fantastic.
Yay.
And we're going to call it the Wine Bible. And I said, absolutely not. I'm like, Peter, well, first, thank you, Peter, but we can't call it the Wine Bible. That is too big of a statement. Keep in mind that I'm not known at that point as a wine writer. I'm still known as a food writer.
Right.
And I'm like, that's too big. We can't say that. And he said, well, apparently you did not read your contract very well, because if you did, you would know that a book's title is considered part of its marketing, not part of its content. So you actually don't get a say. And he said, I trusted you for 10 years about everything that's inside this book. Now you have to trust me. And he was right. So
Yes, he was.
it becomes the Wine Bible.
It is like an audacious title, but obviously it's you, and it has lived up to that title. But it just reminds me, the other day I heard the story how John Legend got his name. Probably not a good comparison, but anyway, he was John Stevens. But another musician said, no, you've got to have a big stage name. He goes, absolutely not. And then he thought about it. He thought, no, I'll live up to it. And you and the book certainly have lived up to this big title. All right, so now it's in its 3rd edition, more than 700 pages, covering all the major regions on the planet, with maps and food pairings and glossaries. It's in color, it's gorgeous, and yet not intimidating. So this is the 3rd edition. You talked about the 1st edition was 8 years. Then you had a 2nd edition, obviously. How long did it take to create the 3rd edition?
The writing only took 5 years. So I'm getting so fast.
Wow. You're just speeding along there, Karen.
I am speeding along, yeah. But there are two reasons why. One is the world of wine is now a big place. It's a really big place. It's a very global place. And second of all, I'm a very rigorous researcher. I will spend 2 weeks on one little fact within a sentence, within 30,000 sentences. to be sure that I know something really right. And, you know, the Wine Bible also, in a sense, it doesn't cut any corners. I'll give you an example. I mean, most people would say something like, when wine glasses were invented, comma, blah, 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 is true. The Wine Bible sentence would be, when wine glasses were invented in 1615, comma, da, 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 is true. I mean, it's really laced through with really concrete information, even in the simplest sentence. And so it takes a while to figure those things out.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet it's more useful because of the density of information that is still not yet overwhelming. And let's talk about this, how does it compare, or what makes it different, do you think, from the big tomes, the major works that are out there, a lot of which come from the UK, but elsewhere as well? What makes the Wine Bible different, in your opinion?
Well, two things. It's the first big American book, in a sense. It's the first big book that was not done by a Brit or someone in Europe. And that may seem like it doesn't make very much difference, but I think we have, and I'll include Canada in this, we have a different way of being. It's different in North America than it is in any of the European countries or in Great Britain. And the books that you and I would have first had were often very much wine tombs. They had stripped out food and culture and fascinating side issues and history and religion and art. And for me, it was all those things that made wine make sense. You know, I wanted to know that, I don't know, in New Zealand there are 25 sheep for every winemaker, or I don't know, little crazy
I love
things.
those fun facts, though. That sparks a conversation. Like someone can carry that off to dinner and say, "Did you know?"
Yes, and they're revealing of a place. They're revealing of a culture, and in a sense, they're revealing of all of that kind of material is revealing of terroirs and communities. So I put all that stuff back in to a big book. And I also think that there's an underlying, in many of the big books in the past, there's an underlying elitism. I was at Petrus tasting the 1982 Too Bad You Weren't There. That kind of like
sort
attitude,
of wine
right?
porn or whatever you want to call it. Sometimes we get that on social media. It's like, it's not useful. It's just too bad you don't have my life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, in North America, we are less inclined to think in that classist way. I didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge. I wasn't on their wine teams. I didn't have a father who had cellars of vintage port. And so I think that my more conversational and modern tone, I would call it a more modern tone, it just resonated more quickly with people. They're like, wow, this woman is really, she's a woman like me. And people write to me and my team all the time saying, I just love the conversational way you write about wine, as if I'm sitting right there in the kitchen with you. And that always makes me feel great.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it approachable, because you don't have to read it from start to finish. You can just open it anywhere. And, these little quick facts and sidebars are just like snippets of conversation. I love that, like an aside that you might have at a dinner party. It's just, you can start anywhere. So it's not like, oh gosh, when am I going to have time to read that? It's really approachable. Although, approachable sometimes has a bad rap as a word, and so does breezy when it comes to books or wine. So I don't mean it in that way. I just mean it's not so overwhelming that you wouldn't want to dive into it anywhere.
Yes, and I think too that most wine books are either sort of for beginners, and then they talk almost in baby talk to you,
Yes.
or they are for people who are so well grounded in wine already that only they can even read a paragraph and know what's going on.
True.
And so the Wine Bible also was one of the first books that spanned knowledge levels. It was, fascinating, and like beginners would say, "Wow, I didn't know that. Do you realize this is how this works? Wow, this is so interesting." And at the same time, it was so academically rich that people who really knew their wine also were fascinated, because almost everybody's wine knowledge is very Swiss cheese-like. You might know a lot about Napa Cabernet, but know nothing about Austrian Gruner Veltliner, or the reverse, or whatever. So the Wine Bible was very solid. Even people who knew a lot about something would be immediately intrigued by other chapters that they didn't necessarily know a lot about.
Right. And so, yeah, it's holistic, and the world of wine is growing. So what was the hardest thing to leave out? Was there a particular region or topic that you just said, I can't do this, or this is going to be, 7 volumes?
Yes. Someone the other day asked me, "Where's the Wisconsin chapter?"
Ah, okay.
I
Missing,
said,
is it?
"That's in the cheese Bible." No, I mean, I'm sorry, Wisconsin, and I'm sorry, Romania and Bulgaria too. You're not in there, but not to truly make fun of that, because so many interesting wines are made in even places that are not covered widely, but. I had to leave something out because it's already more than 700 pages, and at some point when a book becomes close to that, publishers can't bind it very easily, and they want to put it into 2 volumes. Right. Well, if you put a book into 2 volumes, you may as well cut your sales, down by 9/10, because people just don't want to carry around 2 volumes. They don't want to take 2 volumes with them on their vacation to Italy. They don't want to take 2 volumes and throw it in their trunk so that when they're going around to wineries, they can flip through it. So I didn't want a 2-volume book, and I had to leave out places that I felt I could, in part because perhaps like Romania and Bulgaria, for example, those wines are not widely distributed in North America.
Right.
So
that's true. Relevancy does help, especially if you're primarily targeting a North American audience, even though the book is sold worldwide. So you had to taste, if I have these numbers correctly, you had to taste about 8,000 wines for the research for this edition, costing more than $168,000. How did you manage that?
Yeah. It was not easy, because one of the things that I have worked hard to do over 20 years now of writing about wine is to have sort of the golden Rolodex. I'm sure you're the same, right? Over time, you get to know, at one point these were Rolodexes, now they're in our computers, but you have contacts worldwide. You know who to call to get certain facts, or certain wines even.
Right.
And when COVID happened, all of a sudden, everyone's Rolodex sort of fell apart, because now the person who you were trying to reach in Tuscany, who used to head up the Chianti Classico Consortium, there was no Chianti Classico Consortium now. It was shut down, and people had moved on. And so all of a sudden, finding who was who and where people were and how you could get access to both wine and information was much harder. But luckily, I think importers, and of course I couldn't travel, which was, I mean, I had done a lot of the traveling for Wine Bible 3. Luckily, I did before COVID. But in order to get wines to taste, whether they were sent to me as samples or I had to buy them, either way, I had to contact importers directly. And even then, sometimes the wines that we needed to taste were held up on container ships somewhere in the Atlantic or in the Pacific. So it was one of the reasons this wine Bible took even 5 years too, was just getting access to all of the great wines of the world was harder than it had ever been before.
Wow. Well, but you don't shy away from challenges, though, Karen. So I guess you muscled your way through it. Now you have several new regions that are part of this book. Maybe which ones are they, and why did you choose to include them?
One of them that I just loved writing about was the chapter on Great Britain. England is a fast up and coming wine region, and English wine country is about just an hour south of London, so it's easy to get to. But it turns out, as you would know, that big arc of limestone that starts in Champagne kind of arcs up over Paris, becomes the White Cliffs of Dover, then goes right down underneath what are called the North and South Downs, DOWNS, of southern England. And so the sparkling wines there are fantastic. They bear such a tremendous similarity to Champagne, but have their own freshness about them, because southern England, unlike Champagne, is a coastal region. So they're just, I went there for the first time in 2018, and I was just so astounded by the quality. I would have, if you had said to me 20 years ago, all wine books will one day have a chapter on Great Britain, I would think probably not. But that's one of the places that global warming has been kind to. In most other regions, global warming has been climate chaos. It's been very devastating.
It has been, yeah.
But I loved writing that, and I loved writing a new chapter I put in called Wine in the Ancient World.
Oh, yes, right.
And that was very hard to write about because I know, and the reason I put it in part, was because I knew it was going to be hard to write about, because if someone just in a restaurant leaned over to me and said, okay, so describe wine in the ancient world, I'd be like, I don't know. Where did wine begin? Because we all hear, wine began in Armenia or Israel or Turkey or China. Where did it begin, and when did it begin? So as I did the research for that chapter, I had to make myself a handwritten chart to just get equalized times, because one person's 5,000 BC is another anthropologist 7,000 years ago. This happened. And then some scientists speak of, this happened in the Paleolithic era, and this happened during the Iron Age. So, wow. I had to make all that equal. And then I realized, oh no, something I didn't know before. And that's that those ages, the Neolithic age in particular, is different by country. Oh. So the Neolithic era, which is the most important one for wine, is different in China than it is in the Near East, in Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Western Turkey.
Is that due to climate, or was it due to just societal development?
Yes, societal development. The Neolithic era is when pottery is invented, and so that happens earlier in China than it does in Europe. And pottery was critical because for the first time, humans could store liquids and solids, and that led to permanent settlements where people lived permanently instead of being nomadic. And that led to the domestication of crops, including grapevines as vineyards.
Wow, it all fits together. It's great.
It really does.
Brought it
Yeah. So it has to, it's that Neolithic, that's the one age now. I really know pottery is invented and everything is like a domino from that point on.
Huh. Wow, there you go. Okay, and so what was the most difficult region to research?
I made the mistake in Wine Bible 1 of leaving Italy and Germany to the end.
Oh, okay.
This is the biggest mistake a writer can make because, you know, it's a little bit like running a marathon. You're going to spend years on this book, and you have to be your own motivator because no one's going to see it, right? It's very solitary. It's not like someone is saying, "Good job, good work, love this chapter." You're just there with yourself and words. You know this. You've written several books.
It's true.
And so I thought, oh boy, do not leave places that are hard to write about, hard from a research standpoint to the end when you're already getting kind of tired from all this writing.
Sure.
So I think I wrote Italy second this time. I wrote Oregon first because you got to ease yourself in.
Got to warm up.
Yeah, that's right.
Stretching with Oregon.
Exactly. And then Italy, you know, you just want to say chaos, turn the page. I love Italy, but figuring out, you know, Italy has a very loose relationship with the rules. So they are, you know, for everything you can say, you could make 5 cases of people who but never do it that way. No, it isn't that variety. It's yeah,
Yes.
Italy's a challenge.
And you've
Germany's
also mentioned
complex.
that Italy is acronym hell. I think you've mentioned that before.
Yes, it is. You know, DOC, DOCG, IGT, DPI.
NBD, no big deal. I mean,
I
it's
know.
just,
MGAs now. I mean, like, wait,
Yeah.
what is all this?
It's true. Oh my goodness. And so was there a tough region for this edition to research? Like you got up front with Italy, but was there
Yeah.
another one?
Greece is always very hard to research because it's hard to find sources of actual information apart from the wineries themselves, and also because of a very simple fact, which is that Greece is written. Some wines are written about. They're very. It's a very mixed up way that I think that they have appellations,
Okay.
and anything that you want to write about could be written in English, Greek, using the Greek alphabet, a kind of translated version of English into sort of modern Greek. So you have to line up names that can be very hard and decide what you're going to call these places, which sometimes have 4 names for the same either place or idea. So Greece is a bit of a challenge. China can be a statistical challenge because the way they collect information in China is hard. And Germany was hard this time because there are almost now 2 parallel systems by which you can find German wines. And I felt like I needed to explain them both.
Wow. Thank you for
Anyway,
your service.
yeah, yeah.
Was Canada a challenge at all?
Oh, Canada.
We're sorry.
What is with you guys?
I'm going to say it. We're sorry. We're sorry. We're always sorry for everything.
You know, I love Canadian wine. Canada makes such delicious wines, both in Ontario and in British Columbia. But the problem there is they're not sold in the United States, which makes no sense. California wines are sold in Canada. It
Oh
should
yeah,
be
it's easier
reciprocal.
for us to get California wines here in Ontario than for us to get BC wines from our own country shipping across. The
Yeah.
shipping is a nightmare.
It's a nightmare. And so trying to get samples of some of the Canadian wines that I wanted to try that I hadn't was very hard. I actually had to ask, I won't say who, but I had to ask a Canadian journalist friend to round up certain samples for me and send them to me as olive oil or whatever he
Smuggling
marked.
ring. Yes, that's the way you have to do it. It's like right back to Prohibition days.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
But
unbelievable.
it's so Canada. Here's another place where climate, the situation with the climate may be beneficial. Cool northern places like Canada have, in all kinds of ways, such a beautiful future ahead of them.
We hope so. But you've mentioned climate chaos. I've heard the term climate or global weirding, and we certainly have experienced that. With late frosts or freak hailstorms or whatever. But yeah, we shall see. And you've mentioned some interesting things in other conversations that you've had. You referenced a scientific study that said all grapevines could be extinct in 28 years, grapevines made for wine.
It's astounding. The phrase that rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, meaning that people are focused on little things when when there's an enormous threat at hand. And yes, the more one looks into the climate issue, the more alarmed you become, because it isn't a matter of just let's plant more trees to sequester more carbon. Whole crops are in danger of going extinct within the next 30 years. And it's worrisome for grapevines, especially Vitis vinifera, because the species Vitis vinifera, to which all of the wines we normally drink belong, Pinot Gris, Riesling, Cabernet, Chardonnay, etc., is in what is known as an indicator crop. It's very sensitive to changes in climate, to changes in water supply, and so yes, grapevines could well begin to go extinct in about 28 years.
So it's not a matter of that they would just migrate north, and find new homes. It's that they could still become extinct even so.
Well, there is certainly that. I mean, pardon me.
Sure.
Sorry, can I take a sip of tea?
Oh yes, absolutely. I've been keeping you nonstop here, so please do.
It's helpful to move north, but some varieties that are very tentative varieties. There are a lot of grape varieties in the world, many of which have been rescued from near extinction in places like Greece and Italy and Turkey and Armenia recently, and Georgia, of course. But the idea that we're going to rescue very fragile varieties probably will cease to happen as people begin to think, never mind all these obscure varieties, can we keep Pinot Noir going, right? Can we keep it going in Canada, in Sweden, in Denmark, or high in the Himalayas, or it's going to get, like the turbulence is going to get rocky pretty quickly here.
Wow. What can we do as wine drinkers to, our small part or whatever, what can we do with our buying choices to help mitigate the impact of climate change?
It's hard to know, and it's frustrating because so many people, I think, would be willing to help if there was a way. One of the things that we as consumers will soon face and will need to accept is that wine probably within the next 20 years will no longer be sold in glass bottles.
Okay.
One of the winery's biggest carbon footprints comes from glass bottles. Mm-hmm. And glass bottles for wine are never reused. Most glass, even when you put it in the recycling, in the United States, I think the percentage is truly only about 35% of glass gets recycled.
Wow.
But glass, to make glass, right, you have to burn fossil fuels in huge furnaces, most of which are either in Asia, in China, or in Europe. And glass is heavy to transport, and so consumes a lot of fossil fuels that way. And the world is running out of sand, a main component in glass. So glass is a big problem. And pretty soon, when we see wine coming in either paper glass bottles or other kinds of delivery mechanisms similar to bag-in-the-box, I think we're going to have to accept that.
Right. Embrace it. And at least as a starter, stop buying those extra heavy glass
Yes.
bottles that say, hey, I'm a good wine. It's like, how about you just prove yourself by what's inside the bottle? But yeah. And then the other thing I think you had suggested was paying more for wine, because pricier wines tend to be less manipulated.
Yeah, I'm always troubled when people talk about how expensive they believe wine to be. And one day pardon me, sorry,
No worries.
I think it's the rain out here.
Yeah.
One day I had written an article, and the wine was that I recommended was $35 US. So I send the article in, and the editor calls me up, and she said, $35? That's a huge amount. Who's going to buy a wine for $35? I said, oh, And so I'm thinking about this magazine, and I said, your magazine headquarters is on Madison Avenue, right? Like Madison in the 50s or 60s. She said, yes. I said, and you, like, are you a tea drinker, coffee drinker? Coffee drinker, great, lattes. What does a latte cost on Madison Avenue in New York these days? She says, it costs $6. And I said, and you drink 2 a day? Yeah, 2 a day. Great, $12 on beverages. Thank you, because this wine costs $8 a glass. It's not $35.
Right.
It's $8, right?
True. That is true.
And that simple math, we forget. We forget that we're okay. We're a $40 bottle of champagne. You're not splurging with $40. You're giving yourself an $8 gift. It's fine, in a sense. Well, hopefully. And there are certainly a lot of wonderful wines that cost a lot less even than that. But I do think that you cannot simultaneously want to drink super inexpensively and want your wine to be organic, maybe biodynamic, as natural as it can be. That just doesn't compute, because the least expensive wines tend to be the most manipulated wines. That's how they get to be drinkable for only $5 a bottle. So you can't kind of have it both ways. And there are times when I am just shocked that a beautiful wine can really even make it here for $20 a bottle. I'm writing about one today in our digital newsletter, Wine Speed. It's a Spanish wine it's a garnacha made in a place called Campo de Borja. And it's $20, and I think, oh my God, this is astounding. I actually want to call them up and say, you need to charge more for this, because it must be very hard to produce such a beautiful wine at such a reasonable cost.
That is true. And you've mentioned that, these cheaper wines, like really cheap wines, are often they're stripped down, like they've been neutered almost, because what's there, the base grapes are not that great. And then they've been rebuilt back up with oak chips or whatever they're adding, dyes or whatever they put back in, and rebuilt, but not in a very authentic way, but it's all to keep the cost down.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, I mean, as long as you know that, then you're an informed consumer. But the idea that a wine like Two Buck Chuck, that there's a vineyard somewhere that is pristine and beautifully cared for, and isn't this Two Buck Chuck delicious? It's just not the case. That wine it could be an oil refinery. It
Yes.
is being highly manipulated to give you a beverage that is palatable and has alcohol in it, but it is certainly not from one of the world's great cared for vineyards.
Absolutely. So I'd love to know, you've also got a section in your book about historic, or you add in historic food and wine pairings. What was the most interesting one that you discovered along the way?
I love to write about the foods of any given wine region, and all of the top chapters have foods of that region, which are different than foods to go with that wine. When it comes to food and wine pairing, I always say that it's more important to match wine to mood than to match wine to food. I really believe that. But that said, wine regions are often, because people are thinking about flavor, they're often really great food regions. So researching the history of the foods that have been traditional in the region is one way of, it's kind of like end running and tackling wine from the other side. But there are interesting facts when you do that. I mean, I only discovered by researching the wines of Austria, I discovered that so-called French croissants are not French.
Oh.
They began in Austria.
Huh.
And the other night I was drinking an Amarone from northern Italy, famous wine, Amarone. And I asked the people I was with, do you know what the traditional dish is where Amarone is made? And in fact, many people to this day drink Amarone with this dish. And people thought, nope, nobody raised their hand. This was a class I was giving. And it turns out that the traditional dish with Amarone is horse meat.
Oh.
And to this day, in the Veneto, in the region where Amarone is made, there are separate butchers. You can't sell horse meat in Italy in the same physical store as you sell beef and chicken, and it has to have its own store.
Huh.
But it's very traditional to have horse meat in Amarone. And
Sorry, why did they separate it? I'm just curious. Why wouldn't they allow it to be in grocery stores?
I think because during the World Wars, horse meat, northern Italy was very poor, and eating horse meat was very common.
Okay.
After the World Wars, both one and two, when Italy regained some financial stability, some people cut corners saying that horse meat was beef when it was not.
Okay.
And so to mitigate false practices, deceptive practices, a very simple and interesting solution was, well, they just can't be sold in the same store.
Huh. Okay. All right.
But those sorts of things are fascinating to me
Yeah.
because they tell you about the people, the culture. A lot of cuisine in Europe is poor people's cuisine, especially because of World Wars I and II. And and maybe too, because I started out as a food writer, I'm always fascinated by the foods of a place.
Yes, absolutely. And what's your favorite sort of strange or weird wine and food pairing?
One of the ones that I love is chocolate chip. I'm a big cookie person. I love cookies. So I know it's terrible, but
No, there's no guilty pleasure. There's just pleasure. Embrace it.
yeah, I love chocolate chip cookies with Madeira.
Oh, that's
Chocolate,
inspired.
yeah, chocolate chip cookies are, first of all, of course, great. Who doesn't like a chocolate chip cookie? Um, but Madeira is such a fascinating wine, not only because of the unique way it's made and the painstakingly long way that it's made, but also because during the birth of America, or rather, birth of the United States, at that time, Madeira was very fashionable. Madeira parties were the forerunners of cocktail parties in the United States. Madeira was the wine that was drunk at the signing of the Declaration of Independence in the U.S., the writing of the Star-Spangled Banner. It was the wine served at all the continental congresses. It had very strong patriotic associations. And we've kind of forgotten that these days in the U.S., but it's a spectacular beverage, and it's great with chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, it's fortified, it's sweet, but it's also very layered, and yeah, it would definitely stand up to those cookies. That is great. All right. Now, you have this section on mastering wine. You talk about glassware, but I just thought this would be a good opportunity to ask about your own glassware. Why is glassware important? And then what was the idea behind your own line of glassware?
Yes, glassware is easy to prove to yourself its importance by getting a good glass and tasting the same wine in that glass, and then 2 or 3 other either wine glasses, or it could be a jelly jar, anything. And it's not entirely clear scientifically exactly what is happening, but every wine lover who's ever done this knows that glass shape, size, dimension profoundly affects the flavor of the wine. And in the last few years, I suppose it started in the 1980s with George Riedel, but in the last few years, a number of fabulous glasses have come on the market. Among connoisseurs, Zalto glasses, or Gabriel glass, or Jancis Robinson's fabulous glass are all available now. For me, the problem was that all of those glasses are about $50 or more per stem. Mm-hmm. And one of the behaviors that makes complete sense is that the more expensive the glass, the less someone is likely to use it.
It's true.
So because you don't want to break something that costs $50, and so you don't handle it as much, and pretty soon the beautiful glasses that you bought are back in their box and in the attic or in the basement. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to see if I could design a glass that was really good for wine, that was easy to understand, and that would cost about $10 a stem instead of $50 a stem. Wow. And the more I thought about and researched glasses, I realized 2 things. One is that glasses represent something that the wine industry does all the time, which is that you have to know something to know something, which drives me crazy. Like,
it's a good way to put it.
The best example is, like the Burgundy glass. Well, okay, in order to know how to use the Burgundy glass, you have to know what Burgundy is. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? Why is this a Burgundy glass?
And what grape is it?
What grape variety is it? Exactly. So you have to know something to know something. And I thought, why are glasses named after wine regions anyway? Why is there a Bordeaux glass and a Burgundy glass? And then an offshoot of that is, well, if every glass is named for a variety, now you have to know something about Sangiovese to drink out of the Sangiovese glass versus the Tempranillo glass or the Zinfandel glass. Mm-hmm. So all of this, as I'm thinking about it, walking down the street, I thought to myself, why can't glasses just be named for flavor? Because I know as a teacher, and you do too, that when you ask people what kind of wine they like, people usually answer very simply. I like big reds, or, I like crisp whites. So this caused me to do a 2-year experiment with different glass shapes and trying to figure out what were the key ideas about a glass that caused wine to be different. And then, could you design glasses around flavor? Could there be a bold and powerful, a glass for bold and powerful wines, a glass for fresh and crisp wines, a glass for creamy and silky wines? And those are the 3 glasses in my Flavor First collection. So it's called the Flavor First collection by Karen MacNeil. They're all the same height. Who wants different heights of glasses in their cabinet or in their dishwasher? And they're designed for those 3 styles of wine. So into the fresh and crisp glass, you could put rosé, you could put Pinot Grigio, you could put Champagne, you could put Prosecco, you could put Sauvignon Blanc.
Could you put a red in there? Or
yes, you could put a red in there. Actually, Sangiovese tastes quite good in the fresh and crisp glass.
Okay. That's a great concept. And they can go in the dishwasher too.
Oh, absolutely, because,
that's good.
They have to go in the dishwasher. Yeah.
Yeah. We don't have someone we can call in to clean all the glassware.
Exactly. Yes.
All right. Oh my goodness. I just have so many more questions, and this will end up being as long as the Wine Bible if I keep going here. But let me just scroll down here because I just want to maybe perhaps get to the lightning round here. Karen, is there something that you believe in wine, about wine, with which some people would disagree?
Well, I think the idea that you don't have to match wine and food all the time. There would be people who would disagree with that. Something else that is maybe controversial is I don't think there should be white wine glasses. I don't think white wine glasses should exist.
Huh.
The whole premise of white wine glasses probably historically was that white wine was somehow lesser than red wine, and it should be more dainty, kind of like women, smaller.
Right. Yeah.
That makes no sense.
Okay.
Really.
Yep.
What else would I don't know. I'm going to think more about that, Natalie. That's a good question.
That's fine. Is there been a useful wine gadget you've come across? Of course, your own glassware. Is there anything else that you've discovered that you really love to use?
I could not live without a bouchon, one of those stoppers that you put in sparkling wine and champagne. In fact, one is in my suitcase right now because who knows when someone might open up a bottle of champagne and you want to keep those bubbles in. So
yes.
I love those bouchons, and we have tons of them in my office. They're not expensive. You can get them on Amazon for $15, and they'll keep a bottle of sparkling wine or champagne fresh for a week.
Oh, okay. Because that leads me to one question I did mean to ask you. I've heard you have a glass of champagne every night. Is that true?
It is true.
Okay.
I don't drive a very fancy car, and I'm pretty modest when it comes to clothes. But I think a glass of champagne every night is the way I love to sort of demarcate the day from the night. And even in my office, if we're working, let's say it's 6 o'clock, everybody knows we're going to open a bottle of champagne. People can work with a glass of champagne beside the computer,
Sure.
And so it's And besides, it's really indispensable to marital harmony.
That's right. Save more marriages than orange juice for sure.
Yeah, and patience. All patience is derived from a glass of champagne, I'm pretty sure.
That's true, that decompression, but also just slowing you down in the moment with your partner or whomever, or just inside yourself. That
Yes.
is what wine does, for sure. Do you ever worry about wine consumption as a woman? Because, we're hearing these guidelines all the time, and they've reduced them again for women in terms of how much we should be consuming a week. Or do you think about that much?
I I do think about it. We are in a business where we have to be careful. When we do tastings, which we do in my office every week, we always are spitting. For me, there's no going out and just drinking with the guys for the sake of drinking. I have trained myself since the time of being a young woman to try and really concentrate a lot on a wine, so that I don't have to take 5 sips to understand it. I can maybe get the wine well in 3 sips,
Sure.
especially in situations where, which I know you're in as well all the time, there are 25 wines in front of you. You can't even spitting. You shouldn't be tasting each wine 5 times to be able to write well about it.
True.
And the other thing I suppose I do is, in all other ways, I try and keep very healthy. I exercise a lot, I eat well, I don't smoke. So maybe I'm above the average in consumption for most women, but I'm doing good other things, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone has to sort of reconcile with themselves their lifestyle choices. But yes, I'm like you. I try to be extra healthy in all other respects. But I do think sometimes that, one of the biggest killers is stress. And I think if we can have wine in moderation, that can go a long way and perhaps do a lot more good than other things. But anyway, it's an
Beautifully
individual
said.
choice. Thank you. So if you could have a bottle of wine with any person, living or dead, who would that be? What bottle might you open, and what might you ask that person?
I think I would. Well, there are 2 people who I would be fascinated to talk to. One would be the former American president, Barack Obama, the first black president, because his road to the top could not have been easy, right? I can't even imagine what it must have, what internal core of determination it took for him to, as a black man, to become the president. That is a fascinating, that he has to be a fascinating person. Mm-hmm. And I also think, in that same vein, in a sense, that it would be fascinating to talk to Hillary Clinton. Here she was, a woman at the apex, and to have to suffer the failure of not quite making it to the presidency.
Yes.
That also, how she dealt with that, what had to have been a crushing disappointment after spending her whole life, in that race to the top, and then have it not come to be. She would be very interesting to share a bottle of wine with. And I would be happy to drink anything if I could talk to those 2 people.
Even that Bulgarian red?
Maybe. It
Maybe.
might be time to bring out the Bulgarian red.
That's true. Probably have a line. Yeah, those 2 would be fascinating. And really, Karen, I mean, they came, from such humble circumstances and rose to the top. I mean, there's a strong parallel to your own rise. I mean, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, your story is movie material. I hope you will consider writing a memoir someday.
Maybe.
Maybe.
We'll see.
Okay. Yeah. No commitments. Not while you're working on the 5th edition. Okay. So, perhaps we'll end with this before we wrap up, and you can give us all your website details and the newsletter that you publish. But do you have 3 words that could describe you as a little girl?
Probably determined, creative, and I think if I said as a little girl, probably afraid. I was.
Sure.
I was. I think even though I give a lot of presentations, I think I'm essentially a shy person and something of an introvert, and that often manifests as a bit fearful. But also because of the polio, when I was little, because I couldn't trust my body in a way, I was afraid of many things. So luckily, I was also determined. One of the things to be determined about is to get over your fear and start doing stuff.
Huh. That is incredible. And 3 words that might describe you today.
Oh, I'm really determined now.
Extra, extra, extra. Those are the 3 words.
Determined.
That's great.
I think I'm determined. I think I'm kind. And I think I'm endlessly curious. I'm just endlessly curious. It's why the Wine Bible has so many people say, "Oh, that's so fascinating," because I'm out there constantly trying, uncovering things that I'm curious about and that are fascinating. So I'm happy about that. I love that part.
Absolutely, and so do your readers and your students and everyone else who connects with you, Karen. This has been wonderful. So tell us, we've got the Wine Bible. 3 people in the continental U.S. are going to win personally signed copy from Karen. It's just gorgeous. I expect that this is available wherever books are sold, online, bookstores, and so on.
Yes, it is available online and in all bookstores. And if you would like a signed copy and personalized, perhaps as a gift for the holidays or whatever, you can also buy the Wine Bible on KarenMacNeil.com. Okay. And you'll see a little tab for the Wine Bible, and it will allow you to write in there to whom you'd like me to personalize the book and sign it. So Perfect. That's also another easy way.
Absolutely. And would it be KarenMacNeil.com or winespeed.com where we can get your free newsletter?
Yes, our free newsletter is called Wine Speed. We have about 40,000 subscribers. It is really fun and fast. You can read it in less time than it takes to open a bottle of wine sometimes. And it has a wine quiz every week. It comes to your inbox on Fridays. It is free. We might next year, we're toying with the idea of charging for it, but for now it is free. So this is the time to jump in there and get on the subscriber list.
Sure.
The wine quiz, people adore the wine quiz. So many people write to me every week saying, "I got the wine quiz right this week." So I think your listeners and your viewers would really enjoy it.
Yeah, like the Wordle for wine, but
yes,
more fun. And is there any other way that folks can connect with you? We've got KarenMacNeil.com, winespeed.com. Is there anything else you want to mention?
Well, of course, we are on social media, Instagram, and all of the other platforms, just with the same handle. It's at Karen MacNeil Co., C-O, like company. So at Karen MacNeil Co.
All right. Karen, this has been wonderful. I just so enjoyed this. I do want volume 2 of this conversation with you. I wish you all the best. I know this will be wildly successful, the Wine Bible and all of your other endeavors, your classes, your courses, and so on. So thank you very much for spending this time with us.
Natalie, thank you. I'm honored, really. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye for now, Karen.
Okay. Bye, everyone. And thanks, Natalie.
Thank you.